I think one of the things that we get lost in with art is a misunderstanding of the term originality. We tend to think of it as something new or novel, but in fact, originality stems from some point of origin. For my own work with indigo, one of the things that is really meaningful for me is the sense of connection to something that's much bigger than myself. These traditions and processes that I use aren't mine, I didn't invent them. And in working with them, I feel a very strong connection to something that's bigger than me. My name's Rowland Ricketts, and I'm an indigo farmer and dyer based in Bloomington, Indiana. I've been working with indigo for about 27 years now. One of the key things that really drew me to indigo in the first place was the ability to start with a handful of seeds and end up with this very, very permanent color. Typically, from the time we plant seeds till we're actually able to dye things takes about a year. I'm working with techniques, I didn't develop them. They've evolved over hundreds, possibly thousands of years of people working with these dyes, figuring these things out and then passing them along. So instead of just sort of going to the store and buying some color, there's something really profound and meaningful to be connected to that history and to be continuing that work. Life can be very, very, very chaotic, and so to be able to make things that are calm and kind of instill a sense of calm is really important to me. And I think that comes through in a lot of the work that I do. So recently, I've started working with yarn instead of cloth. One of the things that I'm very excited about just working with these long linear elements of yarn is that you can create a form that's visually completely permeable. And so in the installation here, there are points where, depending on where you're standing and how the yarns are angled at that point, they become much more dense and you can't see through them. And then there's these other points where it's sort of wide open. Because of how they're dyed, the light may come through from behind and they almost disappear. So there's a feeling of ghostliness to them. They're present, but they're not fully present, and that to me is really exciting and really kind of a new discovery from the opportunity to do the installation here. Planning for this installation was an iterative process. I wasn't able to come see the space beforehand, so I was working off a 3D model. It was kind of a fun experience to kind of test things out, see what would work. With an installation like this, there's always challenges of the constraints of the space, but to me, those constraints become the canvas that you get to work with. So I don't see them as limiting, I see them as really kind of enabling and helping to inform decisions. One of the things that I was really thinking about as I've been working on this installation is the idea of a noden. And a noden is a type of textile that I was taught to make as an apprentice in Japan. It's a hanging partition. Sometimes people hang them out in front of shops. They'll use them in their homes and doorways to divide spaces. And they're a piece of cloth that you move through. They're sort of narrow panels that are stitched together at the top and you can move through them. Depending on where you're standing, oftentimes they're both from one side they're frontlit, the other side they're backlit. Light comes through in certain ways, you can see through them. But they also represent this passage as you move through something to something else. And that sensation of movement or movement through something or passage really informed a lot of my thinking about how the installation took shape. I chose the name Bow for the installation for two reasons really. One is the overall form is reminiscent of the bow of a ship. But I also was thinking about as you move through a noden, you kind of duck down and you sort of bow through, and there's sort of a reverence in that motion and an acknowledgement of your passing through and moving through a space. And so I like that word for its dual meaning. At the end of the day, I spend a lot of time and energy making a color. And a color is immaterial. It's simply the reflection of a wavelength of light. And for me as an artist, that is something that's very compelling. It's very futile. And it's a real affront to a culture where we believe in sort of making more and more and more and more and more all the time. I also think part of the fact of the process is it'd be very difficult to scale up, and I have no interest in scaling up. It's actually a scaling down and really thinking about what it means to do something at a human scale. And my hope is that by creating installations that are at a large scale, that viewers can hopefully start to wonder about, the color itself. The indigo itself is very vibrant. It has a certain vitality to it that I believe comes from the fact that it's both from a living plant and then from a living dye vat. And hopefully some of that comes across to viewers and they start to wonder about the color, where does it come from? And as an extension of that, then start thinking about all the other things around them. Everything is made, everything has a material history. Those materials have an impact on the environment, on our culture, oftentimes on our history. And hopefully people can start to question some of those things and trace some of those connections for themselves.